Hello, this is welcome.us at the table, hosting a welcome table. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Krista Kartson, and I'm the Senior Director for Sponsorship Initiatives with welcome.us. This event is hosted by welcome.us, and we are a nonprofit, non-government organization founded in 2021 to equip and empower Americans to participate in the work of welcoming newcomers, primarily through sponsorship. This is our live webinar, which we call welcome.us at the table. We've designed this space for sponsors and welcomers who care about private sponsorship pathways, the newcomers we've welcomed, and the stories of welcome that unite us all. And we'll start off today with our regular policy updates with our Senior Policy Counsel and Special Advisor, Manpreet Theji, before heading into a discussion with four special guests who will share creative ways that they've engaged their communities in meaningful conversations about sponsorship and welcoming. And finally, you won't want to miss my fellow Sponsorship Initiatives teammate, Ella Bruno, in her webinar debut, interviewing her grandmother about her experience hosting a welcome table. But let's get started with Manpreet for policy updates.
Thank you so much, Krista. Today, I'll provide a quick overview of the key developments that have occurred in the last month, and I'll answer a few of your questions you shared during the registration near the end. We've reviewed policy updates in previous webinars that have not changed, such as the termination of Welcome Corps and the potential travel ban, which you can watch by going to our events page. My colleague is dropping a link in the chat. You can also stay up to date with policy changes and what they mean for you and your newcomer by visiting our policy updates page. I want to start with an update regarding parole status for individuals who arrived in the US through the processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelan program, also known as CHNV. On April 14th, a federal judge temporarily halted the U.S. government's effort to terminate humanitarian parole status and work authorization for CHNV beneficiaries. On April 17th, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, issued an update that, due to the judge's temporary halt, parole termination notices sent to CHNV individuals are not currently in effect. The U.S. government appealed this decision and asked the First Circuit Court of Appeals to block the temporary halt on terminating humanitarian parole status for those who arrived through CHNV. That request was denied. Subsequently, the U.S. government has also appealed their request to the Supreme Court, asking the court to block the temporary halt. We are awaiting the Supreme Court's decision on this request. But until then, the temporary halt is still in effect. This means individuals with CHNV humanitarian parole status will maintain parole status and work authorization until it was originally set to expire. It is very unclear how long this temporary halt will be in effect. All individuals with a primary status of humanitarian parole should seek advice from an immigration attorney immediately to determine their options. If you would like a more in-depth explanation of the active lawsuit affecting humanitarian parole, we invited a litigator involved in this case to our April 17th webinar, which you can check out on our events page. In addition, given that litigation is rapidly evolving, you can follow updates to the lawsuit by following this litigation tracker. At this time, we don't have any updates since last month regarding humanitarian parole for Uniting for Ukraine beneficiaries, but we are tracking reports that suggest that a termination of parole may soon be announced. We cannot confirm the exact timing, so we recommend sponsors and newcomers be ready and prepared. We do not anticipate a notice or grace period before potential status termination. To help navigate these complexities and all available support, we developed a resource hub which offers information and resources about what parole termination means, how to prepare, and what to do if parole is terminated. As you'll see on the screen, this hub includes tools to navigate termination notices, several Know Your Rights guides in case of an encounter with ICE, helpful FAQs, litigation trackers, and a collection of other trusted resources. My colleague is providing the link in the chat, and I recommend you explore it if you have any questions about the information I've presented so far. At this time, there is no new policy updates regarding the pause on US RAP, the termination of the Welcome Corps program, or the possible travel ban. If you're looking for more information on these topics, I encourage you to check out our policy updates page. At this time, we are tracking updates related to the Pesito v. Trump lawsuit, challenging the U.S. government's suspension of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, also known as U.S. RAP. On May 5th, the district court ordered a compliance framework for the government to promptly comply with the previous preliminary injunction orders as they applied to refugees who had arranged and confirmed travel plans to the United States on or before January 20th, 2025. The court has asked the U.S. government to begin facilitating travel for those refugees protected by this preliminary injunction, as well as to provide a status report to the court on the compliance by today, May 15th. It is not yet clear if the U.S. government will comply with this court order. If you would like more in-depth explanation of the active lawsuit affecting U.S. RAP, we invited a litigator involved in this case to our April 17th webinar, which you can check out on our events page. In addition, given that litigation is rapidly evolving, you can follow updates to the lawsuit by following this litigation tracker. I now want to take a couple of minutes to answer the questions, some of your questions that we received when you registered. I unfortunately can't answer all your questions today, but I will do my best to cover those that we have received most frequently. First, we've heard some questions about the risks of traveling, even for those who have lawful status. While I can't speak to any specific case, newcomers should exercise caution regarding travel. Even if they have status permitting international travel, remind newcomers that numerous factors may trigger additional scrutiny, including their destination, trip duration, criminal record, and other considerations. If newcomers choose to travel, encourage them to understand their rights, carry all documentation that verifies their status, keep emergency contacts handy, and consider consulting an immigration attorney if they have additional questions. We also received questions about logging into Welcome Corps application portal. The Welcome Corps program is not accepting or processing applications, and the portal is closed. If you previously created a Welcome Corps account, this means you will not be able to log into the portal. All application-related communications before the program was terminated were conducted via email. Your sponsor group coordinator should have a record of your application's progress in their email inbox. Additionally, we have received several questions about the time frame for applying for temporary protected status. The time frame will vary depending on the applicant's country of origin and their specific circumstances of when they applied. We encourage all individuals to seek competent legal counsel to understand what they are eligible for. Please see our guide to the alternative legal status options for more information. Some have asked if Welcome Corps is completely terminated or if it will resume at a later date. The Welcome Corps program was terminated by the State Department in late February of this year. However, the U.S. refugee admissions program was paused for a minimum of 90-day review period. It is unclear when or in what form US RAP programming will reopen and whether private sponsorship will be included in that programming. When we know more, we will share that information on our policy updates page. We also received the question, are Uniting for Ukraine beneficiaries asylum applications being processed? Sometimes asylum applications can take years to process. So while a beneficiary's asylum application may be submitted and in the system, they may not have been approved in the last few months. Additionally, on April 14th, the Department of Homeland Security issued an internal memo suspending the decision-making on all immigration applications filed by individuals who arrived in the U.S. through U4U and CHNV parole programs. This indicates that DHS will not approve any alternative form of legal status, including asylum, which many sponsored individuals are seeking while this pause is in place. However, we strongly recommend that all individuals with primary status of humanitarian parole seek advice from an immigration attorney immediately to determine if a viable alternative status remains an option for them. One question asked, any news about USCIS's decision to allow re-parole for U4U beneficiaries? At this time, USCIS is not accepting re-parole applications for Ukrainians. Ukrainians who applied for re-parole through their USCIS portals after October 2024 may not receive decisions until or unless the Ukrainian re-parole process is resumed. We encourage you to check out our guide to alternative legal status and seek competent legal counsel to understand what options you may be eligible for. We've also received the question, what is happening with Afghan SIV holders? SIV holders can travel to the United States with private dollars, but they will not receive reception and placement services. An SIV holder may be an Afghan or an Iraqi in any country with an approved visa in their passport and a valid passport or travel document. And finally, we have received questions about the recent news that 59 Afrikaners were recently granted refugee status and resettled in the United States. This move is following an executive order signed by the president on February 7th to prioritize resettlement for an ethnic minority of Afrikaners. This news does not mean US RAP is functioning again, nor does it mean that a system has been put in place for refugees still awaiting processing. We are still learning what this means for the future of US RAP and if these changes will apply to the many refugees still seeking safety. While I wasn't able to answer all your questions, you can find more guidance on our website. With that, I'll hand it back over to Krista.
Thank you for that valuable insight, Manpreet. Over the last few months, we've hosted experts involved in active litigation, as Manpreet mentioned. We've hosted immigration lawyers, storytelling partners, and sponsors to share their experience and offer insights on the changing sponsorship landscape. You might recall that we developed a guide and an accompanying email templates for contacting your congressional representatives in support of private sponsorship. But if you haven't seen it, we'll drop a link in the chat for you to take a look. Many folks who have participated in this initiative have sent us messages that said we've done that, we've called or contacted our representatives, but what's next? What else can I do? And so today we thought we'd hear from a few welcomers across the country who have come up with creative answers to that question of what's next. I'm struck by the fact that each activity that we'll hear about is unique and uniquely suited to be helpful and engaging with their respective communities, whether they're meant to spur a thoughtful one-on-one conversation, connect with audiences around a shared faith, or bring folks together through cultural celebrations. Very personally, I found that having thoughtful conversations about welcoming with my friends and neighbors has helped me navigate this time of deep certainty and concern. And that's why I'm really honored to introduce some new voices to our discussion, those who have led these conversations so well in their own communities. Welcome to Keith, Michael, Jody, and Pastor Eric. We'll start with Keith. Keith is a U4U sponsor who created the organization Transylvania County Cares in 2022, which supports newcomer families in the area. He's from Brevard, North Carolina, in Transylvania County, a place where Keith tells us people really care. Keith, thank you for joining us today. Please tell us more about how you've sparked conversations to support Ukrainian newcomers in your county.
Okay, thanks, Krista. I'm happy to be part of the panel today. I'm going to talk about 4 things. It's the signs, the magnets, the letters, and the schools. And first, the signs, we came up with, as a group, we came up with the idea of getting yard signs. It seemed like a simple idea, so we followed through, created the artwork. We have the term temporary protected status, which is a status that overlaps with humanitarian parole. And somebody could take a photo of the sign or Google the phrase. And so we wanted to have something specific on the sign. And so the group purchased about 20 signs, and some of us put it in our own yard. You can see my yard there on the right. And others put it in their yard. We also asked others that we knew, friends, churches, if they would put it in their yard, and some of them did. One person drove by one of the signs. They went to the website. They contacted me and said, hey, how can I get one of those signs? So that was a little bit of an unexpected response that I got. I happen to have the sign right here. And I took it off the support because I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the indirect ways that I use the sign. Indirect meaning it's not right there in the yard, which is where these signs are normally placed. But on occasion, when I went to somebody's house, I might show them the sign. I might take it into their house, talk a little bit about it. A couple times I took it into a place of business. For example, I took the sign into a coffee shop, got up the courage to do that. People don't usually do that. So, and I took it up to the manager. I said, do you mind if I have this sign in here? And she said, well, I don't know where you're going to put it. You know, we don't have space for it. I said, no, I just want to have it here and set it by my table. And she said, oh, sure. And people kind of looked at it out of the corner of their eye, and they, either supported it or maybe questioned it. But the manager said, I really support your cause. One time I took it into a hotel and I was loading up my cart with my luggage. I kind of stuck the form in there, or the sign in there in between my luggage, and people could see it. Again, an indirect way of bringing awareness, which, is very important to do that. So then we decided to make magnets, refrigerator magnets. So I think we got about 20 of those, and we distributed them. And occasionally I would go into somebody's house, someone I knew, and I would put the magnet right on the refrigerator. And later they would realize it was there, and they knew it was me. And I also did that to my sponsored family. I put it on their refrigerator without them knowing, and they were like, I wonder who put that there. So we have the signs and the magnets. And then with respect to the schools, the letters, I think it's very good to do a letter to the editor. I contacted our local paper, which is Transylvania Times, and I wanted them to do a spotlighting article about my family, and they said, well, I suggest you submit a letter to the editor, 350 words. So that is another excellent way to bring awareness. And finally, with schools, I attended Christopher Dyck Mennonite High School in Eastern PA, and I attended Goshen College in Goshen, Indiana. And I sent them a notice, a excerpt to put into the alumni newsletters, just highlighting that I sponsored a family. And also there was a CNN interview I did a while back, which I also sent them the link to the interview I did. And that's it.
That's amazing, Keith. Thank you so much. And I want to share and just thank you for your generosity. For anyone in our audience who would like to download the design that Keith shared or that you see on screen, Keith has generously shared this design with us, so you can access it in the chat. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll have a link in the description as well. Keith, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about those like one-on-one conversations that you've invited and that people have kind of like come up to you to chat with you about with your sign. As welcomers who know and deeply care about newcomers who we've sponsored, it can feel daunting sometimes to have conversations with people who we don't know, and we don't know where they fall on welcoming our neighbors. Can you tell us a little bit more about why it was meaningful to you to have these conversations to raise awareness?
Seems like everyone is aware of the Ukrainian community, and everyone's aware of the war. And so holding up a sign that says "Stand with Ukraine," immediately someone can relate to that, speak to it. Occasionally, there's a group who may, for some reason, it may be a negative, slightly negative image. For example, one time I took this sign into Hot Dog World in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and for some reason, I felt a little bit uncomfortable having that sign in Hot Dog World. But anytime there's a person that I'm standing near and I have the sign, it brings up conversation. I sponsored a family, and just a chance to talk a little bit more, even about the term temporary protected status. Someone might ask me about that. Gives me a chance to explain one-on-one what that is.
It's fantastic. I'm so grateful. And I think people might want to talk about this issue, but they don't know where to turn or who's a safe person to talk to. But when you literally have a sign inviting that conversation, it allows people to know, like, hey, I'm someone you could talk to because I care. I have a personal story. That's right. And it's, you don't need to know all about temporary protected status or all kinds of different policies. You have your own sponsorship story, and you could share that. And that's really, really meaningful. So Keith, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us today and for your generosity and sharing your design as well. We're going to turn it over next to Michael. From the Fargo, North Dakota community. Michael sponsored 5 Ukrainian newcomers, and he began his welcoming journey through connections made on Welcome Connect. He is the founder of FM Volunteers for Ukraine, whose sponsorship and support extended to over 200 Ukrainian newcomers in the Red River Valley, separating North Dakota and Minnesota. Michael, thank you for joining us today. Can you share with us a little bit more about how you've engaged your community around the topic of sponsorship?
Well, thank you, Krista. What I wanted to do was I wanted to show I also carry a little Stand with Ukraine sign. It's just a regular Ukrainian flag pin, and I wore that on my jacket in the wintertime. I wear it on my shirt in the summer, and it's a real good conversation opener. But when I started this journey 2+ years ago, I did have some really good insight from the head of the Kurdish American Development Organization in Moorhead, Minnesota. And he was explaining that one of the things that people often forget to do is include newcomers in a meal at your home or a holiday, things that might be unfamiliar to them depending on what country they're coming from. So I always started my journey taking somebody to the airport with me, a Ukrainian, invited Americans when we were expecting a new arrival. I brought them into my home and had meals with them. Our group also has, during the resettlement process, we really focused also on socialization so that they had a chance to be together if they chose, and that Americans had a chance to engage just socially. So we've hosted billiards events, virtual golf, bowling. Picnics have been really popular, community picnics. We had a couple of Halloween parties. That was a new and exciting event for our Ukrainian friends because they don't have um, Halloween like we do. And then recently in April, many of our Ukrainians banded together and supported a community cafe dinner as the culture. That you see that on the left-hand side of your screen. So this was an all volunteer cooks, servers, musicians, and it was a big sellout in the community. And it raised money for a community cafe that has a mobile truck and serves people on the streets, if you will. And then our next big event that we're hosting is a family day at a zoo in Wapaton, which is an hour south of Fargo. And we have a large community there. And the zoo is hosting some special animal encounters, and we're going to have a community meal. So this is another way that we can come together, not only as Ukrainians, but as friends. Many of our employers have a team buddy that they assign to a newcomer when they first start employment, so that they have someone that they can ask questions of, that they can count on to have an invitation to a picnic, go fishing, something like that. So this is a way for us to keep the community together. And I feel like it's really important, especially now when we're not really hearing anything about the dramatic part of the war, but more of the political. And so it's really, really helpful that we keep focused on the fact that there's children, there's families, there's single people. Um, we have new babies in our community. So one of our people has taken one of the moms to a baby encounter play date kind of thing at our public library, so the mom could meet other mothers and the baby could have some socialization and enrichment. So we just find that that's really, really a helpful thing. Um, and our newcomers really want to help and they want to pay back. They just don't know how. So they just need someone to say, hey, I need a hand with something, and they're right there and willing. So that's what we've been doing, and it's been really successful.
That's so fantastic, Michael. I could almost taste the borscht now as you describe the celebrations and the cultural festivities that you're hosting. And I know when we spoke prior to this call, you mentioned like in your own community, you know, people, like you said, people heard about the war back in 2022 and were deeply concerned and just hoping for the best. But really, it hasn't been much in the news lately. But these positive events that you have celebrating newcomers and getting the opportunity to talk one-on-one with community members about the situation has really helped to elevate and have that consistent care and visibility in your hyper-local community. And you mentioned even, you know, the local media appreciates the opportunity to come out and spotlight events like those that you're hosting as well. So I just want to thank you so much for your work and for sharing what you've learned and what you've done with others too, who might be inspired to do something similar. Really appreciate you. We're gonna now hear from Pastor Eric. He is a pastor, a teacher, and an author in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Pastor Eric is also an executive director for Rising Village, an organization with initiatives to help marginalized people become full participants in their communities. Rising Village became Tulsa's third refugee resettlement agency in 2024. Pastor Eric, can you tell us about how have you specifically been able to engage members of your congregation and people of faith in your community around the work of welcoming?
Thank you. What a great opportunity it's been to get to know these fellow panelists, and it's really encouraging to see how many people have joined this call. So thank you all for giving us your time today. We have been involved in welcoming, especially in our immigrant and refugee population, for almost a decade now in our church. And so that's looked differently from time to time versus depending on the status of refugee resettlement and the needs and opportunities in the community. So in some ways, it's looked very different since January than it has looked previously. But we have looked for any opportunity we have to either welcome newcomers still or to utilize the same principles of welcome that we believe are driven by our faith and our right in terms of the dignity and humanity of people. We're trying to apply those to maybe some neighbors in our community that we've not met yet, or finding some ways to be able to extend that welcome to people who may be at the moment a little bit hesitant to come out in public and share in our services or our programs, either through our church or our nonprofit. So we've had the joy as a church of welcoming people in times of plenty, with lots of airport pickups and setting up apartments and engaging people in our English programs and citizenship classes and our sewing classes, all the different things we do. Then we've had other times where we're having to be a little more strategic. And I think that's one of those times where it's also creating an important opportunity to help our not only our church and our faith community, but the community at large know the real human stories of our neighbors and the people that we serve. And we see that as a new opportunity to help people see the work that we're doing and the needs of our immigrant and refugee population less as a topic, less as an issue, and more as the real life, living, breathing people that we encounter and can encounter on a regular basis. So we are trying to provide, and have done for years, but trying to find some new ways to provide some education. We had a great example of that on this call. What are some ways we could just give some simple answers to questions, help people more clearly define terms, and maybe understand the landscape better? And as helpful as facts and figures are and definitions, there's really nothing quite so vivid as the real life living human person, as we said, that's in front of someone. So we see it also as very important right now that our immigrant and refugee neighbors can share their own stories and people can get to know them and be able to put a face or a family picture next to some of these things that they're reading about or hearing about. And so that's been helpful. So we want to provide education on small scale with small groups, or we want to educate our volunteers, our staff, and other people on how to answer some of these simple questions with people and always pull them back to the humanity. Some of our staff and volunteers put on an incredible prayer event a couple of months ago that we opened up to the community, and we had several of our immigrant and refugee neighbors participating, either in helping to lead music or read scripture or share their stories. And we had a great attendance at that. But even though that was a larger event on a smaller scale, I think those things can continue to be done in multiple locations and with other groups. Another thing that we think is really important, and I've already hinted at it, but the word is proximity. We want our community to be able to engage personally with our neighbors who we love and cherish, who have so much to contribute and so much to offer. And so we want to keep creating more volunteer opportunities and education spaces where we're not just talking at people, but we're collaborating, even as you'll hear being modeled today in this webinar, so that interaction is there and those relationships can be built as much as the education piece is happening. So that's helping us. I think a shared goal we all have is to try to bring the temperature down in a lot of these conversations and topics. And then in doing so, to let people see who we're really talking about. And in many cases, they recognize, and we've seen this over the years, the neighbors that they already know, and they didn't realize that they fit into some of the categories that they had not quite understood. And so I think those are some of our goals and ways that it works really well in the faith community where you've built trust, but it also works in the wider community, because I think most people, it's really hard for them to have a negative thought or feeling about a person who's been really humanized in their life. And so we look for more ways to do that, and hope that's helpful as well.
Those are such valuable principles. Thank you, Pastor Eric, for the work that you do and the work of Rising Village. Really, really appreciate you sharing with us today. And I want to extend a final warm welcome and thanks to our next speaker, Jody, who is the Director of Education at Exodus World Service. Exodus World Service mobilizes the Christian community in the Chicago area to welcome and befriend refugees. They do this by educating churches and individuals about the plight of refugees, connecting volunteers with refugees through practical service projects, and empowering people to be champions for refugees. Jody, can you share with us a little bit more about what you do and why do you do it?
Thank you. So just an honor and a privilege to be here to share this panel with the others here. It's encouraging to hear the wonderful things that are happening around the country, and it brings me a lot of joy to see those things happening and help us know we're not alone. And so in Chicago here, we have a lot of different ways that we are mobilizing people and trying to spread awareness and education on our refugee friends. And we are a faith-based organization, so I'd like to highlight one of the ways that we've done that. We saw a need for there to be conversation, meaningful conversation that addresses some of the misconceptions that we were seeing in our. We saw that people wanted to talk about immigration, but they were pausing because of those misconceptions, because they thought it was very polarizing and they didn't want to be painted in one way or another. They thought it was confusing, especially when we have so much coming at us through so many different sources. And so we found that many of them were afraid to talk and wanted to have these conversations. And so as we thought about that and we processed it, we decided to come up with an event that might help that. And we call it Faith-Based Conversations on Welcoming the Stranger. And so this is done in person around a table, or we can do it virtually on Zoom as well. And what we have done is we have one church that hosts this. And they don't just keep it to the people in their congregation. They invite other people in the community, people from other faith communities, people from other churches within their community to come and be a part of this. And so they come together, and we have 3 parts to it. The first part helps to kind of unpack immigration and where we're at with immigration. And so we talk through some of those categories of immigration, some of the language around immigration that can get very confusing, as Keith was talking about with his sign that opens up the door to answer some of those questions that people have. So we just kind of go through that in a very basic and simple way that just unpacks it all. And then we look at the changes that have happened recently and what is our current landscape, because it's coming at us so quickly that that's also really confusing to people. And then we move into the second part of ours, where because we are a faith-based organization, this is definitely faith-based, we look at what scripture says about immigration, and we dive into 3 different scriptures and just unpack what that means as a Christian when it comes to welcoming the stranger, as it's referred to in scripture. If you're not part of a faith-based organization, this would be a perfect opportunity at that point to highlight some stories of some refugees that are within your community and talk through those stories and really personalize the immigrants that we have right in our community, the stranger that's among us, if you will. And so we talk through that and get really a connection to what it says there. And then we move into a third part where we, first of all, acknowledge that we all have differences of opinion. We might have differences of opinion on immigration, on the different things that I said, different interpretations even of the scriptures or stories that I shared. They might be hitting people or resonating with them in a different way. And then we talk about the fact that can we come together and have conversation despite our differences? I share with them a study that has been done about how most Americans want 2 things when it comes to immigration. They want to see immigration that is safe. There are a lot of concerns and a lot of fear around the safety of immigration, but they also want to see America be a welcoming country. And so if we can rally around those 2 things, we have people come around a table then, and then in these small groups, or if we're on Zoom, into a Zoom room with someone facilitating, and they just unpack some tough questions that ask them about what they're concerned about when it comes to to immigration? What things worry them? What makes them not be able to sleep at night? What things are worth celebrating and can bring them together? And together around the table, they unpack those together. And then at the end, we have opportunities for them to connect. We're in Chicagoland, so we have opportunities to connect right here in Chicagoland, but we also talk about sponsor circles and the opportunity that they have to sponsor an Afghan SIV holder, and we can help them with those steps of applying for that. And we also have a Bible study that if they want to take that conversation that started there and do that in their home or in their community, they're able to have that resource with the 4-week Bible study that we have.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I know maybe for those welcomers who are tuning in today, if they're a member of a faith tradition, I know your Bible study is online. So my colleague will drop it in the chat if folks are interested in taking that next step out of that you recommend out of those conversations that you facilitate. They could access that resource right in the chat. So just want to thank you for sharing, and thank you all. What I'm hearing from all of you is that if we go back to the question of what do I do next, there isn't necessarily one right answer, but I'm hearing some principles of personal connection is so important, doing this work in community and amplifying the real story and humanity of newcomers that we're serving. And so I just see that thread in what each of you has shared in your own unique creative ways that are meaningful to your communities. So this brings up actually a story. I was speaking with a friend, Ashley Klemashinsky. She's a friend over at We Choose Welcome and was actually joined us here on a webinar just a couple months ago. She mentioned there were some flash flood warnings in her area, and she said they didn't have any storms, just a steady, persistent drizzle for days on end. And that is what activated the potential flood warning. And so Ashley, she likened that to a steady, persistent communication, steady, persistent actions that, like the ones that you're all taking, showing up in our communities, offering a safe space to have conversations, offering our support to newcomers, reaching out to our leaders and to the media. These all collectively have an impact that's greater than any of us can do alone. So I want to thank you again, Keith, Michael, Pastor Eric, and Jody for sharing your insights with us and being part of this movement. Well, inspired by the work that you are all already doing, as evidenced by our amazing panel that we just spoke with, we decided to create a guide to equip all of you with the tools and resources to host gatherings and conversations around this topic of sponsorship. We're calling this initiative Welcome Tables. And so joining us now for her webinar debut is Ella Bruno, my colleague here at welcome.us, and one of the masterminds behind our Welcome Tables initiative, here to explain a little bit more about what a welcome table is and how you can host one. Over to you, Ella.
Thank you, Krista. Hello, everyone. My name is Ella Bruno, and I work on the sponsorship initiatives team here at welcome.us. After hearing the incredible stories of our guest speakers today, you may be wondering how you can facilitate meaningful conversations around sponsorship. You may feel like you need more subject knowledge to get us started, or you may not be sure exactly what you would say if you got this dialogue going. We've heard your interest and your concerns, which is why we developed Welcome Tables, which equips you with practical tips for hosting your own small gathering. Whether you're new to welcoming or are already involved, this guide was made for anyone interested in talking about newcomers and sponsorship pathways with people in your community, with friends, neighbors, family, or strangers. The ultimate goal is to build community connections, foster awareness and understanding, and take action together. As you can see on the screen here, this resource includes guidance for holding meaningful dialogue, a list of videos and educational resources you can consider in the main course, discussion questions, and optional next steps you and your group might consider. Now, you may be wondering what a gathering like this would look like. Well, I'm pleased to welcome someone very dear to my heart who was bold enough to pilot this guide just last week. Without any experience sponsoring, but so much passion to support newcomers, she took the initiative and gathered a small group using this guide. To share her experience, I'd like to welcome my grandmother, Jan Pandy. Welcome. I'm so glad you're able to join us today. When I first mentioned piloting this guide to you, you did not have a moment of hesitation. I would love to hear from you. What motivated you to host this welcome table in your own community?
Thank you very much for having me. When I first heard about Welcome US and welcoming tables, I remember the refugee families that I had worked with in Charlottesville, Virginia, over 15 years ago. Because of language and custom barriers, these families needed support navigating through the schools and in their daily life. They needed support from many people. They were eager to learn, eager to work, and be part of their new community. Now I live in a retirement community in Florida with over 140,000 retirees. We also want to give to our community, and we are involved in the schools, church outreach programs, and other local programs. I thought welcoming refugees in some way would be another option for community involvement.
Totally. And you have such a heart for people and a vision for engaging others. I also remember you mentioning to me that you didn't feel knowledgeable enough to host an event like this. So, what was the process like for you using this guide, and where did you start?
Yes, I really had no idea where to start. It was comprehensive, step by step, how to proceed, taking in different scenarios I might run into when hosting a welcome table. The guide was wonderful. Because I live in an age-restricted community, literally hosting a refugee family would not be feasible. But supporting families in other settings, such as schools, through churches and other organizations that are already working with refugees, would be doable. The guide suggested who to invite for discussions. So I chose friends who already were involved in many outreach programs through the schools, church, and other social service programs. If there was an already existing program working with refugees, they would know about this. So this group became my pilot group. The guide recommended how to begin conversations, how to set goals, how to make the time together meaningful and productive. I didn't initially realize how many people had put immigrants, refugees, and illegals in the same category, and honestly were fearful of getting involved. So before we began, I shared information from the Welcome US site, which was amazing and had so much information that I could share. I also shared the needs of the refugees in my program in Virginia. Sharing this information gave my group a good perspective about the need for welcomers across the country.
Yeah, and you clearly knew that anyone who attended this gathering would want to know what to do next. So you mentioned a few aspects of the guide. I'm curious, what elements were most helpful for you as you started planning?
Yes, I think the section on the main course, of course, mentioning food, which is always a good thing to have. But it directed the conversation to what can we do in our own community and what resources are already in our community that we could look into. So this conversation became a group focus. And the more my group discussed it, the more ideas they had. And the welcome table ended with a list of suggestions for me to pursue and come back with answers, and then we'll proceed.
Yeah, I'm so glad that it was helpful for you in the planning process. I remember calling you and you saying, yes, I want things to do and I want to take action. So I was just so inspired by the way that you were doing research on your own and using some of the videos that we shared in that guide. Now, for the event itself or the small gathering itself, what was it like to host a gathering? Did the event turn out like you expected?
At first, they had their concerns because of the news. Probably they were a little alarmed. Are we really going to be working with refugees? You know, is it going to be safe? But like I mentioned, the more we talked, the more excited they got about it. And through their suggestions, I reached out to the schools and to local churches that were already active in outreach ministries. And I feel that through the guide and all the resources that are provided through the guide, there's a good chance our community will be called into action and will become partners in welcoming refugees.
Totally. And exactly like what Jody said, just being able to provide information is so incredibly useful when there's so many different misconceptions. Not only have you raised awareness for sponsorship, but you've expanded the community of welcomers in your own neighborhood, in your 140,000 person neighborhood.
I think we definitely will be welcoming refugees.
It's a very large neighborhood, but I love it. I have one last question for you. Would you recommend welcomers and sponsors interested in facilitating meaningful conversations to use the Welcome Tables Guide?
Oh, definitely. Yes. You provide a lot of different resources there, whether it's books that you can read, it's, short films, longer films, and just some ideas on how to proceed with this.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. It's truly been a pleasure. Thank you again for your eagerness and your humility and your commitment to taking action in a really real and direct way. If you were inspired by her Welcome Table gathering and would like to organize your own, we're dropping a link to the guide in the chat. We also encourage you to try it out and to share your experience with us. For others, supporting sponsorship may look like finding an organization in your area where you might want to volunteer your time. We created a map of local organizations that support newcomers and who are accepting volunteers. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it is a good place to start. Supporting sponsorship may also look like contacting your representative to let them know just how meaningful sponsorship has been to you. If that's been the case, take a look at our resource in the chat and use a form to draft messaging to send them an email or give them a call. Still others may be interested in sending a quick email to stories@welcome.us to schedule a 15-minute storytelling consultation meeting, where our storytelling team will go over your outreach goals, your experience, and offer resources to help you craft and share your story. And of course, I hope you'll join us for the next Welcome.us at the Table event on Wednesday, June 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern, just 2 days before World Refugee Day, for Refugee 101, which we've designed to deepen our understanding and compassion for refugees and newcomers around the world. You can register by clicking the link in the chat, and the link will also be included in the email you'll receive tomorrow morning, along with some other resources we've shared today. We'll close in just a few seconds, but before we do, we ask that you respond to the short survey that will pop up on your screen once the webinar ends. Your feedback helps us remain responsive and relevant to your work of welcoming, and it's your work that inspires us every single day. After you complete the survey, the time is yours. Take the next couple of minutes to check out the Welcome Tables Guide, book a storytelling consultation, or contact your representatives, and join us again here at the table on June 18th. Until then, thank you and be well.